nerves are rattled today. It is going to be a doozy. I heard someone say once that there's a difference between transparency and vulnerability. Transparency, we share something that someone may not know. We are open, we are honest, and we share an unknown thing. Vulnerability is we share something that someone doesn't know that they may use against us later. And today, I have to tell you something vulnerable. I thought a whole lot about what I would, I'm not gonna cry today, Jesus help. I know. I always, when people ask me about my church, I'm like, there was such an intentional weeping community. I love them. I thought a whole lot about what I would preach this week. Last week I said that Easter was like preaching the Super Bowl. I will not say that again because I realized that after the Super Bowl, those players don't have to play again. But in this vocation, I gotta come back and prepare to encourage and uplift and tell hard truths and hopefully convey in resonant ways the goodness, the grace, and the mercy and love of God. I'll attempt to do that today in two parts. One part very scriptural, and one part just me telling you something. It's gonna blur, but hopefully it'll make sense by sharing time. I feel like this sermon has been loading since I was 8 years old. We talk about this mustard seed of faith, and this week I found myself in so many conversations about sowing and reaping, and one plants, one waters, God gives the increase, and what it truly means to sow a seed. And so here we are with this little mustard seed of faith. I don't have memories of my life before I was 8. At 8 years old, I sat at the funeral of my mother, and I didn't understand. I sat stoically. I did not cry because I had not learned to mirror grief yet. That'll make sense soon. I remember wondering what would happen to me. And I thought in my mind, well, I'm still here. She is not. If tomorrow comes and I wake up, that means I have a future. And I know that seems very advanced for an 8-year-old, but I'm a little bit of an odd duck. This presence of a future, impossible to know, too large to sometimes imagine, and often hard to step into, is my first real experience with faith. When I hear today's text, that's what I think about. Last week, Mary and her crew and the disciples and them got to see something. They saw the Smarties. They touched something. What happens when we don't see it? We can't touch it. We can't know it. I ask myself, what comes next? How do we continue in faith time after time when we don't get to see it? Today's text, and this is not semantics or syntax. So today's text, it does say now faith, but I hear it as now faith. Can you hear the difference? Like there's a now that is preparing you for an explanation, and then there's a now that puts you on a timeline. So now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. The idea that what we hope for, our hope that this blemish-free, perfect future will hold a truth and a reality that we currently may not be experiencing, but that we long for, is really deep theological territory. The part where I get tripped up, I'll use I statements because I'll let you say your own I. The part where I get tripped up is that whole unseen part. The thing that gives our faith and substance, hope. It is by faith that our hope becomes evident. It is the shaky surety that what we hope for can manifest itself before us. So think about a baby. All of us was one at some point. I have not yet met a person born at 40. We saw adults walking around. You were looking. You might have been crawling. You might have been sitting. And all you know is this grown-up just went and got their own juice. You too wanted your own juice. And maybe you consider one day, that's going to be me. I will get my own juice. You couldn't fathom the possibility of it because you had no connection to what was required because you had not yet seen it. But one day, you started to pull up on stuff. Your little wobbly little toddler legs was shaking and trembling, but you were like, okay, I might be able to do this. I don't know. And then you change your mind, you crawl a little longer. But one day, you placed one foot in front of the other. Everyone clapped, and you were off to the races. Your hope was to walk. Your little baby, don't know yet that it's faith, believed you could, and the resulting teetering walk was an expression of the reality that what you hope for can be shown forth in an experience. If we continue with that metaphor, it doesn't stop there. After the celebration of those first few steps, there's running. Now you got to read, now you got to write, now you got to make friends, Jesus. Now you got to make choices. Now you got wants and desires and all sorts of firsts and seconds and thirds and things that require us to exercise this confidence in something that we cannot see. How do we get that faith for the after? After the clap, after the celebration, after the good news. Life is a constant cycle of releasing our faith. It's like on a Star Trek, I was not going to say Star Trek when I wrote this, but it's like Star Trek or one of those good future shows when the scope goes out to kind of get a sense of the atmosphere and what's unknown. But it can't report back to you, but it just waits patiently for you to catch up with it and meet it at the intersection of belief and a promise. But what happens when you get to that intersection and things are different? What happens when we get there and our hope for the unseen and the observation of the reality is misaligned? What happens when the baby can't walk? Is it a crisis of faith? Does that mean there was no substance? I used to tell Samuel, you get what you get, don't throw a fit. But I learned in preschool from Miss Kristen, a new version. You get what you get and you get to be upset. How do we maintain our faith when we begin to see a reality that angers us, when we are upset? A reality that challenges our view of what's normal, what has been deemed the standard, that forces us to confront our own ableism, our own racism, our own homophobia, our classism, whatever it is. How do we reconnect to our faith after that? Put me in my handheld, please. The feeling that exists in that space is hard. The isolation, the surprise, the sadness, the lack of safety for you to talk about your feelings, the anger, that's the space I'm in today. Preaching faith, because I couldn't call in sick. I mean, I guess I could have, but there would have probably been judgment. And then I don't lie, so I couldn't have lied and said I was sick and I wasn't, because then I think in my carnal mind that means I'm really going to get sick, and then what a mess we will have. But here I am preaching faith for the after, while living in a deep frustration as I hold my own. I have struggled so deeply on when and how to say these things to you. But maybe after I say it, you'll be like, she is so dramatic. Wow. And I believe that will be it. And maybe you won't. I don't know. But this is my faith struggle. I do what I want. I have struggled because it is so hard in this society that we live in to be different. And God knows I already stand here before you so different. I stand in my blackness. I stand in my queerness. And who wants another difference? I did not go to the vending machine and said, you know what, I long to be othered. Give me what you got. 3 weeks ago, I was at a therapy appointment. I made a commitment to you all that I had care teams. So I run to therapy. I slide in that Zoom with the wind at my back. I had just got a new therapist. We'd worked together for 5 weeks. I did all the assessments again. I answered all the questions again. And I was diagnosed with autism. And it's hard because last year I went through that same process. The doctor was about 700 years old, him and Methuselah. He was a white male. And he did all of the testing and the assessment. And one thing that my doctor had requested when they sent it was, and I didn't find this out till I got the paper, was please assess for these following things. And he told me, he said, your doctor said assess you for these following things, but I will not assess you for autism. You're Black. The DSM-5, the manual that we use to diagnose mental health things, back when it was the DSM-1, 2, 3, and 4, diagnosed autism for white, young, like 4 and under, boys. Do they align their toys in a row? Do they make eye contact? Do they find it hard to make friends? And other things. There's like 6, and there's 3 categories, and you have to have all of this category, 3 of this category, and at least 1 from this category. But because I was Black, he said, oh, that's not you. So I got an ADHD diagnosis. And you all knew about that, because if you can't see it, I don't know. Like, I'd be a little bit all over the place. But thank God for Miss Brenda, who keeps all the administrative things straight, because I cannot. And I was very open about that. Galen can tell you, I fessed up early. If you want me to create a program, get you somebody else, because I can't do it. And so this new therapist, I was talking to her about my medication. I had just started taking ADHD medication, and all was going well, but it was uncovering something else. I was forced to unmask. Adderall removed my ability to camouflage in society. I would stim more. I would hyper-focus differently. I wouldn't be able to tolerate certain sounds in certain places. I had a jacket on one day, and I could hear the jacket, and I just wanted to perish. You will never see that jacket because I will never wear it again. So this therapist tells me, I'm like, what is going on? Like, is the Adderall, are these symptoms of Adderall? And she said, no, honey, that brings us to a segue. Let's talk about your assessments. For years, I have been told that, oh, you're so high functioning, you're fine. Which truly means that I just have lower needs than some other people who are on the spectrum. Well, you fit in fine with me. Well, that's because I've learned to mirror. I've learned to camouflage. As a Black, racialized person in the United States, my behavior is paramount to my existence. So what happens when I can't mask anymore? I was so afraid. I am so afraid. I promised you all that I would always tell you the truth. That I will commit to transparency even when it hurts. And if I do something you don't like, you can shred that covenant anytime you want to, because you deserve to be led in ways that resonate, right? So I have struggled. But God said today, and I said, ooh, I know you lying. And here I am. It is hard because I had a hope for a certain life. And even seeing that it wasn't going that way, seeing how difficult it is to camouflage, to blend, to always do and say the right things, to be perfect, to always show up in ways that made you comfortable and maybe not me, I still had a hope because somewhere in my mind, I thought, but God, that's how I'll get the promise. I had to confront my internalized ableism, how I viewed autism, how autism somehow became synonymous with nonverbal, or how it came synonymous with needing extra support, synonymous with Rain Man, or I don't know, Temple Grandin. And it is, those are examples. But when we think about a spectrum is not a line. It's more like a pie chart with little pieces. It's like Trivial Pursuit. Some people get all them little pies quick. Some people only have a few. So how do you have faith in the after? How do you get to that intersection? You're at this crossroad of what you hoped, what you wanted to see, what you thought was going to happen, that you believed for, only to find that your world and that your reality is different. When you've been told that you can't be angry at God, when you've been told that you can't grieve and you cannot mourn the life that you thought you wanted, or a life that was not protected because you were different. When you were told that your parents know best what's for you, meanwhile corrupting your faith day by day because they don't want to parent a kid like you. That is the question today. It's not like, do you have faith? I mean, I care, but that's your business. The question is, how do you exercise faith when everything that's happening, everything that's going on is telling you, oh, it's not going to happen for you. It's not going to happen like that. They won't accept you. This will be the straw that breaks that poor camel. I hate that analogy too. The straw that breaks the poor camel's back. Poor camel indeed. If they see, if too many people notice that you can't stay still, that you walk the church, that you rock at weird rates from the pulpit, like, what will you do? Can you trust them enough to be yourself? Will they trust you enough to recognize that just because you're different, you're not less? That just as they are enough, so are you. How do we have that faith? At the end of Hebrews 11, we have just went through the hall of faith. I know pastors that live and love by that scripture. We get to hear about Abraham, Enoch, Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, Mike, I don't know. You hear about everybody that did not get the promise, that did not make it to the promised land, that did not get to see. They stood at that intersection and found denial. They found another thing that was not the reality that they wanted to see. And sometimes we stop there. Sometimes we get stuck there. Sometimes our faith doesn't go beyond the difference in our expectation and our observation. But we have to remember, I had, and still have to, remember the verses following that hall of faith. I'll stay on this mic too. You don't have to change me out. In John 9, the disciples are with Jesus and they come upon a man who was blind from birth. The disciples asked, as they so unintelligently do, Rabbi, who sinned so that this man was born blind, the man or his parents? Jesus answered, he probably sighed real deep, I imagine. Neither. This happened so that God's mighty works might be displayed. We see this text often used to highlight healing, but it's more than that. It is about the after. The after is the text where we see a narrative play out beyond what most see as a cause to celebrate. Yes, Shana, you got a new job. Yes, you get to pastor the best church there ever was. Yes. And God does all that, and here I am in a puddle of tears, grieving the life that I could have had someone loved me, saw me, and cared enough to do something, and still trying to catch hold of the life that I can have. In this text, we don't know. The text doesn't start off, Jesus and them was walking by and saw a man of faith. We don't know what his faith was. We see a person who has been ostracized and set outside of community for not being able to do something that society says is normal or society says is standard. We see through the text faith being built brick by brick as the man has to spend time after the miracle listening to those in power debate his worthiness, his validity to exist and receive a miracle, the logistics of how this thing happened. And then if that was not enough, he just got brought back in community that morning, and by the end of the night, he was kicked back out. But this is why I love Jesus. It was so much of his best that the Bible says Jesus went looking for that man. And he reveals his identity to him. After which the man declares his faith. So now we know in the beginning there was none, which shows us that the promise is not predicated on your faith. The promise is predicated on God. It is Jesus' response to all of that that reminds me of the beauty that's in the after. And it's hard, and I'm going to cry, and I'm going to be sad, and I'm going to punch the air because I did not need another way to be othered in this world. It's beautiful when we can reconcile it, when we can find the sacredness, knowing that it is not God who is othering or belittling us when we are in the unexpected space. She invites us to investigate our faith, to call her to account of the promises that they made. And like Miss Kristen, that lets me be upset when things don't go the way we hope. The promise, the love, the care stays intact. Dear ones, I don't know what others you. I don't know the places and spaces where you are identifying those different things that place you on the outskirts or the fringe of a society that wants you to assimilate. But I do know you don't gotta. I know it's isolating. I know it's hard. But I know God is bigger. We have to remember that faith, like me, exists on a spectrum. Some have a little, some have a lot. Some have lost it but seek it. Some have found it but are scared to exercise it. But no matter where you are with it, God's love and care has not changed. Even when this world others you, when different means less, we have to remember the sanctity and the mystery of our faith. In verse 39, God gives us the better promise. After saying all those people did not make it, it says, but God provided something better for us so they wouldn't be made perfect without us. A promise of a new covenant through Jesus. A promise that does not other, it does not divide, a promise that delights in our differences, in our diversity, and does not dismiss them. It is through that lens of promise, that even today as we hold the tension of our faith, as we wait in the after, as we wonder in the next, that we do what we do and remember Christ. Christ who endured the cross, ignoring the shame, for the sake of the joy that was laid out in front of him. Christ who, filled with love for those at the table, took bread, blessed it, broke it, gave it to his disciples and said, "This is my body, broken, but given for you. Do this in remembrance of